a great Bostonian welcome for Doug.
Lovely introduction, appreciate it very much. How many here want to be happy at work? Anybody enjoy being happy at work? Okay, that's great. I do too, and most people do. But it's kind of sad when you look at statistics. Most people actually aren't happy at work, and you can look at any number of studies that have been done. This happens to be Dale Carnegie, but Gallup also does surveys, Blessing White, other companies. Gallup actually says that 70% of the American workforce is disengaged at work. And they say that 20% of American workers are actively disengaged at work. And active disengagement means that these people are actively undermining their own workplaces. That's kind of sad. And it's great if $1 trillion every year in lost productivity. It's kind of a sad picture. Anybody know what this is? Any guesses? Well, it's two bent sticks. But these two bent sticks are interesting because these two bent sticks actually contain all the information, genetic information, to create a fern plant. So if you expand this infinitely, you will find these two bent sticks at every level of magnification of a basic fern plant. And the degree to which these two bent sticks can propagate and become a single leaf or a frond or an entire forest primeval of ferns depends on the ecosystem, depends on the moisture in the soil, depends on the sunlight, depends on the nutrients. And it's a little bit the same with human organizations. The degree to which human beings thrive and are engaged and are happy in human organizations depends on the ecosystem in which they work each and every day. This is called a fractal. So whatever degree of magnification you look at, you see the same two bent lines, the same shape. Very simple. So it begs the question, is it possible to manage enormous complexity with great simplicity? And is it possible to create human ecosystems that engage the human heart and allow people to thrive and do their best work and be happy continuously? Well, maybe, possibly. So back in 1990, there was an organization that started up in Northern California, started by an entrepreneur there named Chris Rupert. And he had a vision for a new kind of manufacturing plant in food processing, specifically tomato processing. And he wanted to pull together a team and build a state-of-the-art factory and do things better than they've ever been done before. And he called this company Morningstar. The reason I know about it, I was there. I'd worked with him before at another company, and I joined him as a financial controller. And we're working out of a little tiny farmhouse in Central California, which if you're familiar with California, that's kind of the agribusiness area. It's hot, it's dusty, it's technically a desert, and a lot of agriculture. And so we're working out of a little tiny farmhouse. I was the financial controller. We had 24 colleagues. Most of them were technical colleagues, and we were building this state-of-the-art factory on about 500 acres out in the country. And working long hours and 100-hour weeks, and we had a little tiny table about the size of this table in the kitchen of this little farmhouse, and we'd have endless parades of bankers and lawyers and attorneys and customers and suppliers and job applicants, engineers, construction workers. We were working furiously to build this factory. And it was about March of 1990. And our factory had to be ready to run in July. It was about a $27 million factory at the time, which would be double that given inflation today. And one day, Chris came in to the colleagues and said, I'd like to call a meeting and discuss how to organize this company. I've got some ideas that I think can help us achieve better things. So we said, sure. We all got together that night in a little dusty construction trailer out on the job site, and he passed around a document called the Morningstar Colleague Principles. And he said, basically what I'd like to do is boil down the governance of this enterprise into two core principles. The first principle is that human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings. When you think about that principle, it's really the foundation of all law everywhere in the world. So every law against assault and battery and theft and burglary and rape and kidnapping and murder and all the rest is predicated on that fundamental principle. And the second principle is people should honor the commitments they make to each other. And when you think about that principle, it's also the foundation of law, especially civil law, and especially contract law. Contract law is meaningless unless people won't keep commitments that they make to each other. So we talked about these principles for a couple of hours. At the end of the evening, we kind of looked at each other and said, we can't really object to these. They're very obvious. And so away we went. And to the best of my knowledge, that moment was the birth of organizational self-management, at least at the level of a large manufacturing enterprise. So we had about 3.5 months to go. Working furiously, we had thousands of acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground. We had vital equipment arriving on ocean cargo freighters from Italy. We had hundreds of contractors on the job site working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I would run around the job site with a checkbook, paying people so they keep working, keep going. Finally, on July 16th of 1990, we threw the switch. The first loads came through the yard, and we produced 90 million pounds of tomato paste for the world market, and we changed the cost structure of an entire industry, and we did it all without a single human boss. So the company went on to grow. So we expanded operations up and down the supply chain toward customers in remote warehouses around North America, and toward the field in terms of harvesting and transplanting and trucking and farming. We built another factory and another factory. We became the largest tomato processor in the world. And all of you have eaten our product. Thank you. Appreciate it very much. I believe everyone in North America has eaten our product, and millions of people around the world have eaten our product. It goes into everything you can think of, from ketchup to salsa, soup, steak sauce, barbecue sauce, taco sauce, spaghetti sauce, pizza sauce, and a million other products. We did it all without a single human boss. So, how does this work? How can this be possible? There are lots of skeptics. I had a business professor who's rather famous a few years ago say that it's very cute, it's very interesting, would never work in a complex manufacturing environment. So I'm going to disagree a little bit with Nancy when she said maybe this isn't a tech company. The colleagues of Morningstar deal with enzyme kinetics, plant genetics, cell biology, thermodynamics, global currency exchange, dozens of other disciplines that I can barely pronounce. I think we're pretty complex. But no bosses and no titles. So this method of operating attracted and the cover was the world's most creatively managed company. So how does this work? What is the rocket fuel that organizational self-management provides? Rocket fuel does two things. It provides thrust and propulsion, it also provides guidance. And we think we get both of those things from organizational self-management. So there is a bit of a recipe involved in creating this rocket fuel that lets us manage enormous complexity with great simplicity. And the first thing is it's principle-centered. We organized our entire enterprise around two core principles. Now we do have some supporting principles around conflict resolution and things like that. But those two core principles, don't use force and keep your commitments, are the foundation. They're the cultural DNA of the entire enterprise. Just like two bent sticks are the entire basis for a firm. We ran the enterprise basically for 6 years on nothing but those two core principles before we even began to instantiate some supporting structures and systems because of our growth and the need for greater coordination and communication. The second thing is it recognizes that human beings are the ultimate reality. Only human beings can act. Only human beings can make decisions. We believe that teams and organizations are basically fictions. They are things that are, they're not tangible. They're concepts. Only human beings are real. Only human beings can act. Organizational self-management recognizes that and incorporates it into its ecosystem. We recognize the important drivers that are propelling this method of management today. And the drivers are economic, they're technological, they're social, and they're philosophical. I have a friend named Peter Kessenbaum who wrote a book with Peter Block called Freedom and Accountability at Work. And he talks about traditional management and traditional management systems being a conspiracy of blame. It's actually kind of safe and comforting to know that if you're a manager, you can blame the employees who didn't follow your directions correctly. And if you're an employee, you can blame the manager who didn't give you correct directions or enough resources or whatever it is. Self-management removes the possibility of a conspiracy of blame. Every individual has accountability and responsibility and transparency. And every individual is fully accountable for his or her actions and decisions in the workplace. It's the ultimate in organizational accountability. Social drivers, millennials grew up natively with technology. They're used to instant communication. They have no interest in hierarchies and bureaucracies. If they aren't engaged from the get-go in an organization, they will leave. There's no reason to perpetuate organizational systems that were designed in the 1840s, in the days of the steel companies and the railroads, when information moved at the speed of Morse code. There's no reason to perpetuate those systems today. Information moves too fast. We need to be agile. And again, it's about managing enormous complexity with great simplicity. Morningstar is the example of that. Let me talk about an economic driver. Has anyone heard of the management tax? Management is a tax. Let's take a system where you have two simple rules. Let's say that you're in an organization that makes widgets, and your span of control is that you need one manager for every 10 workers. That's one rule. The second rule is that managers are paid 3 times more than the people they manage. Well, in that kind of a company, in a small company where you have 10 workers, you need one manager. And if the workers make $30,000 a year each, your total payroll for them is $300,000, and then they need a manager makes 3 times more, $90,000. If you adopt organizational self-management, you can give every one of those workers the skills of management so that they can manage, and those skills are pretty straightforward. Some strategy, planning, organizing, controlling, selecting, hiring, and coordinating. You can infuse the skills of management into every one of those 10 people, pay them all $5,000 a year more, and not have a manager. And even if you give them all a raise in the first level, you'll still save $50,000 a year. Take it one step further. Let's say this organization grows by a factor of 10. So now you have 100 workers, each of whom has a manager, but guess what? Now you've got 10 managers. So with your span of control, you need somebody to manage the managers. If the rule is they're paid 3 times more, you got somebody for $270,000 a year. Guess what? If you infuse the skills of management into every one of those individuals, you don't need the 10 managers, and you don't need the manager of the managers. And you can give every one of those 100 people a raise, $5,000 raise, $500,000 a year, not have managers, and still save $670,000 a year. The economics are pretty compelling. This is exactly what Morningstar's strategic competitive advantage consisted of, and what financed a lot of our success and growth over the last couple of decades. You have to be thinking about this. Your competitors are thinking about it. The interest in organizational self-management is growing, it's global, it's unbelievable. It is a white hot topic right now. Absolutely has to be considered by leaders and decision makers of enterprises. Rocket fuel has to be handled properly. And in self-management, you have a concept called total responsibility. So what this means is that every individual in the enterprise identifies the processes for which they assume complete responsibility and accountability. And these things are freely negotiated with peers and agreed upon. But we go beyond that one step further. And we say that everyone has total responsibility. To the degree issues come into one's scope of awareness, individuals have an affirmative obligation to address that issue. So if I'm an accounts payable clerk, and I'm taking a break and I'm walking by the rail dock and I see the forklift driver is loading product that hasn't been properly cleaned and they're loading product for a customer, I own the issue. It is not okay for me to just say, well, I'm just an accounts payable clerk and I'm going to go back to work now. I have to address it directly, or I have to find someone who will address it directly. It is a sense of total responsibility for every issue that comes into one's scope of awareness. We also incorporate the idea of competition, but competition is not what most people think of competition as. Competition is derived from a root word, a Latin word called competare, which means seeking together, learning together. It's not about fighting. It's not about win-lose, beating the other guy. It's about learning from each other. So at Morningstar, there are multiple levels of competition. There's competition between the 3 factories. There's competition between business units within the factories. There's competition between individuals within business units, but it's about learning together. It's about identifying practices We also talk about power and non-empowerment. That's why I call my book Beyond Empowerment. Lots of companies have empowerment programs. In self-management, we go beyond empowerment. Self-management is power itself. Everyone has all the power they need to accomplish their personal mission, to acquire resources, to build relationships, to do their very best work from the first day of work. First day of work. And everyone has an equal voice in the enterprise in terms of communicating with anyone they want to talk to about any of those issues. Self-management is beyond empowerment. Self-management is power. And again, it's about commitment keeping. When people make commitments at Morningstar, they're expected to be fulfilled. And if they can't be fulfilled, they're expected to be renegotiated. Commitments are extremely serious. And it's one of the two pillars of organizational self-management is practice at Morningstar. Commitments have life cycles. They're based on request and response. Because in self-management, no one can direct the activities of another person. Like, no one can go up to a person and say, stop doing X and start doing Y. Command authority does not exist. Everything must be accomplished through request and response. And everyone has an obligation to respond affirmatively to professional requests. So the commitment has a life cycle. There's a request, there's a negotiation phase, there's a fulfillment phase, and there's a closure with possible renegotiation. Commitments are sacred. They're extremely serious. They are capped. That's how stuff gets done. So, we're taking off. We're in outer space. We're in 0G. And we have zero command authority. It's really interesting. Traditional leadership, traditional management, where people have power to tell people what to do, power to fire people, that kind of leadership causes management muscles to atrophy. When you have to accomplish things by making requests, it forces you to be good. It forces you to collaborate, to communicate, to build relationships, to be clear, to be transparent, to be honest. It builds leadership muscles. We also have this concept that work is play. We read a book when we started Morningstar by Charles Coonrad called The Game of Work. When you don't have traditional management, it means you don't have a boss to tell you whether you're doing a good job or not. You have to tell yourself. And the way we do that is by creating scorecards. And we call them stepping stones. Because we consider them stepping stones toward perfection. We never benchmark against other companies or other industries. We only benchmark against perfection. And so these stepping stones, you could call them KPIs or whatever, They're generally time series, two-dimensional line graphs showing trends. So in the case of an efficiency metric, what's perfection? It's 100%. In the case of a cost metric, perfection is 0. These trend lines are published transparently across the enterprise, and they spur conversations. Is your trend line bending toward perfection? How can we help you bend the line even faster? Is it bending away from perfection? What can we do to help you turn it around? It's first collaboration, it's first teamwork, it's first the pursuit of perfection. It's a game. It turns work into a game. I had some colleagues who were interviewed a couple of years ago for an ebook. They had a really cool interview, and they basically were describing how they couldn't wait for the weekends to be over so they could get back to work on Monday and play the game of work. And everyone has the opportunity to be a leader and to be an innovator. It's really cool when an entire organization allows for the possibility of leadership and innovation everywhere, anywhere and everywhere at any time. A couple of years ago, we had a mechanic who theorized a better way to handle materials, chemicals in the workplace. So he took the initiative, he did some research, did some cost studies, he talked to stakeholders who were affected by that system. He built a financial case. Because all these folks, many of them, have some financial literacy. They can figure out return on investment. He obtained financing. He implemented a project. Project, I think, had about a 200% return on investment. And play the game of work. And they're the heart and soul, really, of what makes the factories run. So as we grew, I mentioned we ran for 6 years or so with nothing but our 2 core principles. Then we grew. We added another factory, and we realized we needed some communication systems in place to help us organize and manage things. So we developed an instrument called a colleague letter of understanding. And when you're a self-managed professional, a colleague letter of understanding is kind of a peer agreement. It's how you organize your relationships with your peers. And colleagues that are connected to each other on a colleague letter of understanding is just about the same size as an agile development team. So the average colleague has 7, 8, 9 peers with whom he or she connects on an agreement, because those are the people with whom individuals tend to work most often. In some sense, everyone's connected to everyone, but that's not realistic. Morningstar currently is about 400 year-round colleagues and about 3,000 seasonal colleagues. And the season runs from early July to October. So these colleague letters of understanding, you just ask people to create them when they come on board. And they have some elements, some of which are listed here. We ask everyone to develop a personal commercial mission. And we want you to think about why you're here. Figure out, why do you come to work here every day? What does excellence look like in your role? And how does what you do support the overall mission of the enterprise? commission the enterprise to produce tomato products that meet the product and service expectations of customers in a cost-effective, environmentally responsible manner. How are you furthering that mission? And you know what? If it takes you 6 months to go around and meet people and get your footing and figure out what your exact personal commercial mission is, that's fine. Take all the time you need. Just think about it and get it right so that it resonates with you and that it's meaningful to your fellow colleagues, the peers with whom you work. Have a mission. We ask people to identify the processes for which they agree to be held accountable. What are the exact processes that you're responsible for? List them. We want to know exactly what they are because we want to publish this information across the enterprise so that anyone can look you up and see exactly what it is you're responsible for. The enterprise itself dictates processes that it needs to run. There are hundreds, if not thousands of them in a manufacturing facility. And every one of those processes must be allocated to an individual or individuals. They must be accounted for. So which ones are you accounted for as an individual? We want people to think about the scope of their decision-making authority. At least think about it. Formalize it if you wish. Are you the person who makes the decisions about this process? Are you the actual decision maker? Are you merely making recommendations about a particular decision to another decision maker? Or are you acting on a decision? Are you carrying out a decision that someone else has made? Be clear. Be clear. And then we incorporate the idea of stepping stones. So every process should have a way to tell you if it's working or not. Stepping stones, or the KPIs, are attached to each and every process. Again, there are no managers walking around to tell you if you're doing a good job. You have to tell yourself. You have to know how you're measuring the process. Dan?
Doug, I have a question about the relationship between the stepping stone and the definition of perfection. Could you develop that a little further?
So, we benchmark stepping stones against perfection. So if we are measuring, say, boiler efficiency, and that averages 97 to 98%, we want to get as close to 100% as we can, and sustainably and consistently. So we try to just benchmark. We want to know what perfection is for each and every stepping stone. So legal disputes, we want $0. Things like that. Every stepping stone.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we have this concept of an enterprise constitution. So our colleague principals to Morningstar colleagues are like a constitution, like the United States Constitution. They have literally never changed in a significant way in 26 years. We adopted them. We've added a couple of words here and there over the years, tweaked them a little bit. But the fundamental principles, which are all based on the two core principles that I mentioned earlier, really are unchanging. And that's what lets people be free, because they know they can count on those principles always being there for them, protecting their voice as individuals. We don't just, throw out new policies and procedures and principles every year. We don't do that. They're fixed. The fixed nature of Constitution is what lets people be free to do their best work. That is a very important element of Morningstar's self-management system. So we like to think of organizational self-management as creating a gigantic agile ecosystem for the entire enterprise. And I did a little research and looked at some of the agile principles and agile manifesto and lined it up with some concepts from Morningstar. But what waterfall is to agile, it's kind of like traditional management to organizational self-management. I mean, waterfall probably worked, it had its day, did its thing when it was used in the 1940s or whenever it started. But today, not so much, not so applicable. Traditional management worked. I mean, in the 1840s, literally, information moved at the speed of Morse code. Railroads literally needed a manager for every 100 miles of railroad track. It was the only way they could keep trains from running into each other. I mean, it did its thing. It worked for its time. But today, information moves too fast. Traditional management can't keep up. Traditional management is extraordinarily costly. And that's why companies around the world are looking at new ways of organizing, like self-management. Agile values customer collaboration. Morningstar, everyone's involved in a business unit. Every business unit has a customer-supplier agreement with the business units that it's connected to. And in some cases, external customers as well. Agile values individuals' interactions. Absolutely the same in organizational self-management. Everyone has a voice, an equal voice, a right to be heard. And really, it's about teamwork. Again, it's about simplicity. We base everything in self-management on the two core principles that have never changed. It's about satisfying the customer. Morningstar's company mission is about meeting the product and service expectations of our customers. It's about face-to-face communication and agile. The way we resolve disputes at Morningstar is we require people to directly communicate with each other. There's no supervisors or managers to whom you can take complaints. I can't complain about Johnny or Susie to my manager. That does not exist. If I have a problem with Johnny or Susie, I got to go talk to Johnny and Susie directly. It's about risk. Agile systems better at managing risk than waterfall, where the customer may not know what he's getting until the last minute. In organizational self-management, in a sense, everyone's a boss with respect to the commitments that they are affected by. Who's more likely to notice a threat or opportunity in the workplace? A manager who wanders through a workplace 3 or 4 times a day, or peers who are working side by side with each other all day long? Development teams, very similar to colleague letter of understanding colleagues. We have ongoing retrospectives all the time in organizational self-management. Right now, we're engaged in post-operations strategy meetings. What worked? What didn't work? And then going forward, what does the future look like for next year and the year beyond, etc. Nancy talked about the agile system within the larger ecosystem. Organizational self-management is a way to create an entire agile enterprise. Completely supportive of all agile activities inside the enterprise. Can anyone guess what this is?
Organizational chart.
This is Morningstar's org chart. This happens to be a static picture of the digitized colleague letter of understanding relationships taken to a computer lab at the University of California, Davis. If this were a time-lapse movie, it would be in constant motion. It would be shape-shifting and changing constantly as people enter and exit the ecosystem and negotiate and renegotiate their roles with their peers within the ecosystem. I'd love to see that movie at some point. It's kind of like a spider web. It's extraordinarily resilient. You know, if you brush a spider web, you can damage it, but usually if the spider's there, she'll quickly rebuild the spider web. So if people exit the enterprise, nothing stops. Other individuals step in, they reallocate the roles and responsibilities. They need to go to the market and hire someone, that's fine, but nothing stops. No problem. Total resiliency.
This is a fuel a second, 7.5 million pounds of thrust. I think we were all surprised at how strong that thing was. It had 2 to 3 iffy missions before ours, but it was a piece of cake. It just worked beautifully. Unbelievable.
5 engines in the first stage blast the Saturn V to 7 times the speed of sound.
The second stage cut in. Big bang.
At 40 miles high, it's still
When
accelerating.
you staged, you were thrown forward in the belts and then backward in the belts.
And I thought I was being catapulted through the instrument panel.
All sources show the stage is burning very quick.
The third stage fires twice. First, the boost into orbit. The second burn takes the crew of Apollo 8 where no men have ever been.
Starting this journey to self-management is disconcerting, it's perhaps uncomfortable, it's challenging, it's, gee, why would I do such a thing? Am I really sure that this is where we want to go? It's so comforting to know that I've got this manager and these managers, and I've got this structure and this organization, this hierarchy, and it's all familiar, and that's how we've always done things. We've always climbed the career ladder. We've always had the perks and the benefits and the different things. Why would I want to start a journey like organizational self-management? It feels disconcerting and kind of weird. But just like the video clip, even though the rocket rumbles at the start, and it's kind of strange, and it feels odd, once you break free into outer space, it's really quite amazing. It's peaceful, it's simple, and it's clear. And the opportunity is there for every organization, anywhere. Had interest in this system of management from every sector, from every country, almost, from every type of industry, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, large, small, finance, banking, insurance, manufacturing. There are no inherent barriers to adopting a system like this. The only barrier is one's interest and one's will, one's desire. Sounds weird, but companies are adopting this around the world. The economics are compelling. The management tax is real. The rationale is there. So what I like to do is challenge companies. And allows people to do their highest and best work and realizes enormous success. If that kind of a company can figure this out, why would any tech company or any company not want to consider it? So with that, I'll hit the brakes and take some questions. Thank you.